Our application really developed nicely. We are now able to set up our own messages here and save them here. Deleting and editing does not really work, but we will get this to work too. Before doing so, let's have a look at the input component again though. It works that if we click here, we add it, but what doesn't work is it doesn't clear this input here. Also, it would allow us to submit an empty field. And both is not really what I want. So we can enhance this by using another feature Angular 2 offers us, forms. Angular 2 makes the creation and management of forms very easy, and indeed it offers two approaches to do so. The template-driven approach and the data-driven or reactive approach. I will show you both, but for this form, I want to start with the template-driven approach. So let's work on that. The template-driven approach is named template-driven approach because it uses this template to create the form. Basically, we create the form just like you always create forms. Add a form element here. Let's simply delete the action because we're not going to submit this directly to the server. Angular 2 will handle this form. And then let's copy all that code and paste it in there into the form. Now with that, we quickly created a form in HTML in the template. And Angular 2 is clever enough to automatically detect this form. It detects the form element here and derives that we want to use a form here and automatically constructs the form in the background. What do I mean with constructs the form? Well, Angular 2 manages the form for us, and for this it tracks the validity of the form, the current value, and much more. All of that is stored in a form JavaScript object Angular 2 creates for us automatically. And this is what I mean with that. It creates this object for us and stores it simply because it detects this form element. We can override this behavior, as you will learn later, but for now, let's take advantage of it. This form here is a very simple form, but whilst Angular 2 does detect the form element, it does not detect the inputs for us. It certainly could do that, but you might have a form where you don't want to register all the inputs as form inputs, or maybe you have a custom component which holds your inputs, so it doesn't do that. You have to tell Angular 2 which parts of the form are actually inputs you want to register. This is very simple to do though. Let me remove this local reference. I'm not going to use this approach anymore. Instead, in order to tell Angular 2 that this input here, just going to restructure it to make it easier to read, that this input here should be a control, as it is called, of that form, I simply add ngModel to it, like this. Do you recognize this? We used it before, though with squared brackets and parentheses. Well, without that, all it does is it tells Angular 2, hey, this input on which ngModel is placed should be registered as a control of the form which was automatically derived by Angular 2. Now for that to work, it is important that you have the forms module added to the imports array in the app module though. We already do have that, but I just want to highlight this. This is important. So with this, what I can do now is add another thing here, a normal attribute, the name attribute, and I'll give this a name of content. This is a normal HTML attribute, has nothing to do with Angular 2, though Angular 2 will automatically detect it to store this value of this input on a control it gives this name, which we assign here. With that, we're storing our content. But it would be nice to be able to now do something when we hit the submit button. We do have a click listener here, but this is not how you actually handle the form submission, so let's delete it. Instead, Angular 2 gives us a new directive which exposes an event we can use here. It's called ngSubmit, and it should be enclosed in parentheses since it is an event here. There we could execute onSubmit, and therefore let's rename this onSave method to onSubmit. Now, as you see, we no longer pass the value of our form like this. Now we could use two-way binding to get access to the content and store it in a property automatically, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to update a property on every keystroke. I only want to pass this when we actually hit the submit button. So how do I pass the form Angular 2 creates for us to this onSubmit method here? We can use a nice little trick or, well, simple approach Angular 2 offers us here. I can assign a local reference to this form, as before, with the hashtag and then any name of your choice, here simply f. This would give us access to this form HTML element, but I want to get access to the form Angular 2 created in the background. I can get this access by assigning equal and then ngForm. With this command, I'm basically telling Angular 2, don't give me access to this form HTML element. Instead, give me access to the JavaScript object you, Angular 2, created for me. And then I can pass this local reference or this form to the onSubmit method. And here in my component, I know that I will get the form as an argument, which is of type ngForm, which needs to be imported from @AngularForms. And then in here, I can simply console log form. And I will comment out the other lines for now. Let's see what happens if I now reload the application, open up the console, and type something here, and hit save. You now see we indeed get an object of type ngForm submitted, and this is the form Angular 2 created in the background for us. Now definitely feel free to play around with it and have a look which fields Angular 2 created there. You will see the controls, which is basically an object holding all the controls Angular 2 knows. Here, that's only the content control. Again, this is the name I assigned in the template. Here, with this attribute. And then you can see on this content control, you got more fields and so on. A very important field on the overall form is this value field here, which holds an object representing the value of the form. Again, with the content control, the name we set up, and then the value we entered. Now, since we got this value field here, it's very easy to go back to the TypeScript code, comment that in again, remove the console log, and here simply take form.content as a value. Form.value.content, excuse me. This will populate the content of this newly created message with the value entered into the content input field in our form. And with that, we're using the template-driven approach to now submit this. And we can enhance this a bit more by now, after all of this has been done, calling form and then reset form, like that. So if I save this, let's see the new application here. I will reload this and add something. And if I click save, you see we created, but now the form is reset thereafter, which means it now is empty again. The input is empty again. It means more than that though. In such a form, remember, I can still submit an empty field and I don't want that. I can go in my template and add the HTML5 validator required. This is not Angular 2, this is HTML5, but Angular 2 will recognize it and now knows this input is required. Which means that now if I save this and I reload this one more time and I type into there, you now see it has a red border because it is empty. It is invalid. Where does this red border come from? Well, let's inspect this element. Here you can see this input got a couple of new things attached to it by Angular 2. And very important is this part here in the classes, in the CSS classes. We got form control, which is the bootstrap class, but we also got ngPristine, ngInvalid, and ngTouched. These three classes are added by Angular 2, and they represent the state of this input. They tell us that it is pristine, which means we haven't entered anything. It is invalid because it is empty, even though we said that it is required, so it should not be empty. And it is touched because I clicked into it. If I reload the application and inspect this, You see now it's also invalid, but it's ng untouched because I haven't clicked into it. And where's the red border coming from? Well, that's a style I set up in my public style sheets style CSS file down here. Any input which has ng invalid and ng touched gets the red border, because I don't want to put the red border around inputs which are invalid but haven't been touched yet. The user had no chance of making them valid yet. This is what leads to the red border, and what now means that if I click there and hit submit, well, I get this built-in error, but once I enter something I am able to submit, and thereafter the form resets, and it's not bordered red because the classes are also reset, so this is again untouched. With that, we're using the template-driven approach to manage the creation of new messages. A huge step in developing this messages functionality.